Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tom Shoup, and I'm Editor-in-Chief at Government Executive Media Group. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event, the Work From Home Digital Summit. We can't promise this will be as much fun as a Disney sing-along, but we can say that we're going to have some great information and dialogue for you today. So we're looking forward to it, and we hope you are too. We're going to discuss how the federal government is operating in a way it's never done before. Missions, priorities, schedules, wages, benefits, technology, tools, and locations are changing and will continue to change. How are government employees and managers handling this shift in creative, productive ways? And how will the current work from home directive push the government to rethink responsibilities and adjust resources accordingly? We'll have sessions throughout the day that will explore remote management tools, cyber infrastructure, and CARES Act funding. Our closing session will consider what the transition back to the office, which is in many cases under serious consideration already, what that might look like and how different government work will be going forward. But before we get started with all that, a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button, which allows you to ask questions of the speakers. We'll be fielding those toward the end of each session, and we encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation at any point. If you experience any technical difficulties, just click on the help icon, and a member of our support team will assist you. So that brings us to our first session of today, productivity versus protection, work versus life. We'll explore how agencies are preserving worker function and continuing to meet deadlines remotely. And I can't think of anybody better to help us get kicked off with that than George Scott, who is the Assistant Inspector General, the Deputy Inspector General, at NASA. Thanks for being with us, George.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Michaela and Finley for providing me the opportunity to participate in this morning's summit. And thanks to you, Tom, for moderating this first session. Thanks to everyone who's joining. Go ahead, Tom.
Sorry, George, didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, I wanted to open by saying congratulations to you. It's a big week for NASA.
Yeah, it is. And it speaks to some of the challenges, right? As the federal government and NASA in particular has shifted to pretty much 100% telework. Right, last Saturday, it was amazing to watch the SpaceX Dragon Crew Demo 2 mission get launched from Kennedy Space Center. And so imagine, right, just a few weeks ago, about 3 months ago now, I guess, as an organization, NASA was in a full, everyone working pretty much on center. And then in mid-March, we shifted to the vast majority of the agency, including the Office of Inspector General, going to 100% telework, except for those folks who were deemed sort of mission essential, mission critical, to help get Demo 2 off the launch pad last Saturday. And so I think that's just an example of the kinds of challenges not only NASA but other federal agencies are facing. How do we continue to, first of all, ensure the health and safety of our workforce, right? Because let's be clear, if our employees do not feel safe and protected, they ultimately cannot be productive. And so as leaders, as managers, as supervisors, I believe our number one duty is always to ensure the safety and protection of our workforce. And nothing has sort of challenged the traditional ways of thinking about work and what productivity means than this current pandemic. And, just right out of the gate, right, I'd just like to acknowledge, right, these are some challenging and difficult times for us as a nation, right? We have a global pandemic that's threatening our health in ways we'd never imagined. And here more recently, right, we're having, protests and challenging unrest in the fight for racial equality and social justice. And it's important, I was on with a group of my folks yesterday. It's important that during these times, we all take a moment, right, to make sure we're engaging in self-care, but also some self-reflection in terms of sort of where we are as individuals as we try to navigate these challenging times. In the Office of Inspector General, we're responsible for overseeing $20+ billion in NASA spending. NASA's got over 17,000 civil servants, in addition to thousands and thousands of more contractors. We're a relatively small office at OIG, right? We have about 185 folks spread out across, NASA's 10 centers. Folks saw Kennedy Space Center on Saturday, right? You see Mission Control down at Johnson Space Center in Houston. And so we have our folks spread out, and our responsibility is to ensure the integrity of NASA operations and looking for opportunities to root out fraud, waste, and abuse, whether it's through audits of various programs. We have the SpaceX Demo 2 mission going on right now, but NASA has the Mars rover coming later this fall, and so we'll get a chance to see a brand new rover put on the surface of Mars. I was out at on the West Coast last year as they were putting the final touches on the rover, and at JPL, and it's just amazing, right? I think one of the great things about working at NASA is literally one of the coolest places on the planet, and so but along with that, it comes challenges as to how do we continue to provide sufficient oversight when we're all pretty much sitting at home. Well, even some of the NASA workforce is back on center, and so that's for me and for our organization one of the real important challenges that we're facing. Tom, I think when you and I were speaking a couple of days ago, I mentioned to you that last fall, in an attempt to ensure that as an agency, NASA OIG was conducting telework in a more consistent basis. I had the brilliant idea to develop a brand new policy that our folks could telework no more than 2 days a week over each week, basically.
How's that working out for you?
Well, as I mentioned, in another moment of brilliance, right? Just a few months later, I was holding a town hall with all of our folks, basically telling them to get your laptop, go home, and we have no idea when we'll see you again. and so I think that's just an example, though. While the sort of updating the policy to ensure more consistency in how we're treating employees was absolutely important, but as leaders and managers, as you know, Tom, there's always the opportunity, right, or the challenge of being overtaken by events. And I think as the federal workforce, as the senior executives in the federal government and the leadership of the federal government continues to need to be flexible, right? And to me, that was a great example of, yeah, George, that was a great idea, but that's not relevant anymore. What are you going to do to sort of shift literally within a few days, right? We went from that first week, that early part of the week, the third week of March, to working normally, to within 2 days flipping a switch and sending everyone home, and trying to make that transition, to make sure we had the right IT infrastructure, to make sure that we were clear in our expectations for employees. One of our managers in our audits group came up with this great sort of guiding principle, and it's sort of what has helped us manage through this. It was mission accomplishment with accountability and flexibility, right? And I thought it's a great sort of NASA sounding thing as well. But we just wanted to be clear. It's like, this is going to be different. Like, let's not pretend as though this is business as usual, because it's not. But let's put that guiding principle out there so as a touchstone for everyone to understand. This is what we're expecting from our folks, right? We want to get things done, but in a way that holds each of us accountable, but also demonstrates flexibility. And sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Can you walk us through those first few days and weeks of what that was like, and what specific new measures and procedures you put into place to adjust to the situation?
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks for that question. As I mentioned, in that week when it was decided that, we need to basically shelter in place for our own health and safety, we had a town hall with our folks the early part of that week, and we sort of talked through, like, this is going to be different. This is going to be challenging. Folks like myself who normally didn't use, sort of like video chatting and that sort of thing. I was much more of a walk around person, and that's how I spent some of my day, touching base with my folks to check in. And we said, look, we all got to sort of throw that out the window now, right? We really just need to basically take our laptop, take whatever you think you need for the next few days, ironically, right? Not knowing that it would be 3 months later and we're still in the midst of this, and let's go home and let's try to be safe. I think that the biggest challenge we faced at NASA OIG was just a technology challenge. We use technology infrastructure, which is fantastic, by the way. But on that first full day of telework, we realized that a vast number of people, rather than using, video chat functions or Microsoft Teams, we were all trying to conduct meetings by using, the teleconference lines. And so, we had a meeting scheduled a sort of check-in with all of our staff and realized no one could get on the line because it was inundated with folks trying to conduct their meetings via the teleconference. And someone sent out an email. It's like, hey, we do have like video chat options. Why don't we try those? And I think just those first few days, just getting staff familiar and comfortable with using the technology infrastructure, and also on a personal level, right? Just trying to figure out how's this going to work at home, right? For those with children or parents they're caregiving for those with spouses or significant others who in many cases were also working from home. How are you going to decide what's the workspace versus the home space, right? And how do we decide when's enough? I think over the last few weeks, one of my biggest concerns isn't that my folks aren't working enough, is that they're working too much. Because in this 100% telework environment, it is so easy just to keep working. Right? You normally would have you've gotten up from your desk at 4:30 or 5 and headed home. Now it's just easy to just take a small break for lunch or dinner and just hop back on. And so as we transition from those first opening days with my sort of concerns about, are we going to continue to get the work done and be productive? Now I'm like, trying to figure out like, what can we do as an organization to make sure we encourage our folks to spend some more time on self-care, because it looks like we're going to be in this for the long haul now, and I really want to make sure that ultimately the staff at NASA OIG are continuing to remain productive, but also I'm concerned about potential burnout for my folks. And again, if our folks are not doing okay personally, they're not going to be able to do okay in terms of the work.
Are there specific steps you're taking or considering along those lines to make sure those kind of things get taken care of?
Yes, one of the things we are continuing to emphasize with our leadership team and our managers is, be self-aware, right? Just be self-aware about how things are affecting each of us as individuals. Because if we're not self-aware, then we're certainly not going to sort of understand how we're showing up for our staff. And so we're reminding our leadership, our managers, continue to check in, be self-aware about how you are doing. The second thing is be mindful, right? Be mindful that these are not usual times, and to sort of understand that, on some days it's going to be hard for our folks to show up in their best selves, right? There may be things going on at home. There may be personal challenges. There may be health challenges. And the final thing we've encouraged folks to do is to be intentional about our actions. While we normally might have walked around and sat down in someone's office and chatted with him or her for a few minutes, now let's make the extra effort. Let's make that extra phone call. All right, let's jump on Microsoft Teams for a quick check-in, just to visually connect with folks, but continue to measure our outcomes. Right, we continue to need to get our audits done. We continue to need to make sure our investigations on track. And so, we have weekly dashboards that the leadership team's looking at just to sort of see, are we staying on track? Are we continuing to issue our audit reports? I mean, just last week, we issued our semi-annual report to the Congress. And so in addition to making sure we're focusing on the people, it is important to continue to focus on your key outcomes to make sure that as an agency, we're not falling behind in our work. Because the taxpayers, while they understand the current circumstances and that we need to work remotely, they're not going to understand, nor should they, that we cannot get our work done.
Have you had to adjust people's work schedules in some sense to deal with things like the need for childcare and to take time off for other reasons?
Yes. Fortunately, I'm with NASA, right? Who's just always like the best place to work in the government, and generally the number one place to work in terms of employee engagement. And so, with that foundation of being a great place to work, the Administrator Bridenstine and the overall leadership team at NASA has really encouraged all of us, right, as supervisors, as leaders, to use the ultimate flexibility within the rules. Right. As it related to pandemic, there was already an infrastructure in place to address extended excused leave, and understanding that, particularly once schools closed and once daycare is closed, that a number of folks who are parents are responsible for caring for children. They had other responsibilities now during the workday. And so it's really important for us to provide them that time to do that caregiving, and to sort of reschedule some of our meetings, for example, or to help people understand that, yeah, the quote unquote normal workday may not work for you right now. So if you need to sort of log off during the middle of the day for caregiving reasons or just for self-care reasons, that is, not only is that okay, that's expected. And so again, just using the current, flexibilities within the rules in terms of time and attendance, in terms of extended excused leave. I think just bringing all those tools to bear again to ensure the health and safety of our workforce uh, only does more to prime the opportunities for increased productivity. And so, we've been sort of monitoring, in terms of just making sure that our supervisors are continuing to extend those flexibilities, uh, and encouraging all of our supervisors to continue to be flexible. And I think as this stretches out, I think that may be more of a challenge, because I think the more we get used to sort of doing this remote work, there may be the tendency to want to lean back into the, hey, we're all been doing this for a few months now, so why can't we all just do the 8 to 5 thing, and sort of so that we're all on the same time. So I think remaining mindful of not just expecting things to quote unquote go back to normal in terms of work schedule when things are not normal in terms of where we're working and how we're working, will be an important challenge, and to remain consistent in terms of what our expectations are for staff.
How have you had specific security issues you've had to address with use of new tools and new approaches?
Yes, and I think all of us, right, in each of our agencies or organizations have had to deal with some of the network security issues. I think the biggest issue for us is like which of the video conference platforms could we use? Whether it's Microsoft Teams, there's an issue around Zoom. There's some security issues around Zoom. And so as a federal agency, we were not, initially some of us were using it and they're like, no, 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 no. Let's not use that. There are other video conferencing features you can use. And so, one of the things we've just encouraging our staff that before we sort of jump on a platform that we're not sure about, like just check in with our IT security people. And, as we know, right, the cyber attackers, they're not taking a break just because we're working from home remotely. They're not like, oh, we'll cut up some slack right now since they're working remotely. In fact, because we're having to dial in through VPNs in ways we normally wouldn't have to. I mean, there's a greater exposure, and so we are being much more mindful. And at NASA OIG, our IT security folks are monitoring that every day, and the number of attempted cyber hacks aren't decreasing; they're actually increasing every day. And so we are having to make sure that our software is patched in a timely manner, because what we've learned over time, right? It only takes one little gap in your IT security infrastructure to expose the entire organization to potentially significant vulnerability and exploitation. And so we are having to remain very diligent, not only in the software platforms that we're using, but ensuring that we're staying on top of our IT security infrastructure. And I think, for agencies who, have many more employees than NASA OIG, but, to recognize that vulnerability is still the same. It's ensuring that you have an airtight IT security infrastructure, and also ensuring that you're checking in with employees to see what if any additional IT tools they may need to continue to facilitate their work remotely over the long term.
You have mentioned collaboration tools and video conferencing and things like that. Have employees adjusted to using these new tools, and are they using them effectively?
My experience over the last 12 weeks, Tom, is absolutely. And I'll be honest, I think I was one of the holdouts in using like the video conference tools. I'm much more like, I'm not great on the phone, and wasn't going to be great using the video conference tools. But again, sometimes necessity drove the change, right? When we realized the teleconference lines were all booked up. Well, what are we going to do now, right? And so I think that sort of really moment of reality is that we will have to change sort of our business practices. And for now, I mean, pretty much every meeting we have is a video conference meeting. Whether it's one of our standing senior executive meetings that we do weekly, or I was in a meeting yesterday, and a group decided like, hey, we wanted to have a meeting after the meeting. You're in a big meeting and you realize, like nothing really got decided, and there's still lack of clarity as to what's next. And so a bunch of us just jumped on Microsoft Teams for the meeting after the meeting. and had a quick chat. And I think that, and the fact that we're just able to do that so naturally now, where perhaps a few months ago, some of us would not have ever thought of doing that, really speaks to the fact that, with the right tools, we can continue to have that person-to-person interaction, that visual interaction with folks. That is so key to making sure that we stay connected and engaged with our staff. And so now basically the expectation is if we're doing a meeting, we're going to be doing some sort of video version of that meeting. And only in the rarest of circumstances will we now try to jump on a conference line.
How has this changed the way you operate as a manager?
I think for me, the biggest challenge for me is again, it's just getting comfortable using some of the technology to communicate, and having to remind myself to be intentional, right, about trying to connect more directly with staff. And so I've had to sort of put on my calendar, like, check in, call. And I've actually, over the last few weeks, been doing just check-in meetings, just video meetings with staff. And not talking about specifically like what audit or investigation they're working on, but more just talking about how they're doing, right, in the current environment, and sort of seeing what myself or Paul Martin, the Inspector General, can do to better support and encourage them. And I think as leaders, as managers, and I think I mentioned this earlier, we have to be intentional in those actions. We can't wait for staff to raise his or her hand and say, "Hey, remember me?" We should be actively engaging and reaching out to them. And I always like to jokingly say, right, in challenging times, right, they either validate your leadership and management styles or they exacerbate it. Right. If you're pretty good at leading your people and managing your processes and organization, chances are, situations like this is going to validate that. And the things you would have naturally done, you're going to continue to do. On the other hand, if you haven't done a good job leading your people and connecting with them and engaging with them or managing your organization, times like this is pretty much going to shed a pretty harsh spotlight on that. And I think the key is, whether we're doing things well or we have areas where we continue to need to improve, just being honest about that. Being honest about stuff like, hey, we don't know what's going to happen over the next week or 2 weeks or months, right? And as we think about return to work, one of the things we're doing now is setting up an employee manager working group so that our employees have a voice in what that return to work eventually is going to look like. Because it is never a good idea just to impose, right? It is better to collaborate and make sure the employees have a voice, because their health is at stake here, their mental well-being is at stake here. And so I want to make sure that as we build this return to work pathway, whatever that may look like, that they understand that they're the priority and that their voices will be heard before we make any decisions about the path forward.
We had one question come in from the audience. In my shop, we had already demonstrated we were fully functional with people teleworking 4 days a week. Now that you've shown you're capable at 5 days a week, will you recommend that your agency radically increase its use of telework?
That is something that's absolutely under consideration right now. As I said, just a few months ago, we were actually dialing back telework in the organization, ironically. But now that we've sort of seen and demonstrated, not only sort of, just, qualitatively, but quantitatively, we can do this. And so the discussion that the Inspector General, myself, and other senior leaders are having right now is what is working for the NASA Office of Inspector General? What is that going to mean going forward? Obviously haven't made any decisions yet, but I think we've all come to the conclusion, right? It is going to be fundamentally different than what we left in March, right? And the only question is, what will the new normal become? And right now we're sort of open to all ideas, right? Because if we continue to have to do this for several more months, and which is looking increasingly likely, we may just sort of get to that point without really even having to decide to be at that point, right? If you understand what I mean. And so, but again, though, it will require us to sort of think differently about, for example, one of the big challenges to doing that, though, is as we do audits and investigations, we need to interview folks. And while you can do some interviewing via video conferencing, how do you go out and inspect a part that may be a substandard part that potentially could end up on a rocket, or we have an audit right now going on looking at hazardous material, how NASA handles hazardous material. Well, talking to people about how you store hazardous material is much different from being on center and opening up the cabinet and realizing the cabinet wasn't locked and you have highly toxic materials, above someone's eye level, which, by the way, violates all sorts of rules, and being able to see that and document that. And so that would be one of the challenges for us is, how do we continue to do the on the ground work that's required of, auditors, investigators, while also continuing to encourage, right, extended telework. And so I think having those discussions and figuring out how we do both, I think will really inform the decisions we ultimately make about how much teleworking we will be doing in the future.
Yeah, it's a whole new world. Have you thought through as leaders when you might return to the office and how that process will unfold?
Fortunately for us at NASA OIG, right, as part of NASA, we're following NASA's broader guidance about that. And to his credit, the administrator and the leadership at NASA sort of laid out, a clear framework for how we will be deciding when to return to work. And it's based on several stages, much like the states are going through now. But right now, all of the NASA centers, because of the health challenges, remain at the two higher level stages, stages 4 and stages 3, where mandatory telework is still in place. And as over the next several weeks or months, as each individual center sort of meet certain criteria, then we can move to that next stage where we will start to consider some limited return to center in terms of some small amount of employees returning to work. But right now, that we're still pretty much in 100% mandatory telework mode, except for unusual circumstances. And for example, we're not traveling right now. Anyone in NASA OIG who believes they need to travel has to get approval from us. And so while we're just starting to begin to sort of talk about what return to work will look like, we're still in the very initial early steps of that.
Will you ultimately be doing audit work on how NASA as a whole has shifted to this new way of work and the security considerations and all of that?
Yes, absolutely, right. Because not only sort of part of our broader oversight responsibilities, one of the things we are tasked to do is twofold, right? Is monitor how NASA is spending the COVID-19 funding that it received. The Congress appropriated over $2 trillion with a significant amount going to various federal agencies. NASA, right, not being one of the key players in that, received about $60 million. And so over time, we will be monitoring and auditing how NASA manages that funding, but also, doing a check-in. It's like, how did the agency respond to this, right? What impact did it have on the missions? What impact and how have they managed the IT security aspect of this? NASA's management and governance of IT security has been one of the longstanding management challenges that we've highlighted over a number of years. And so we will be checking in to taking the organization's temperature in terms of consistency in its human capital practices, as well as how it's managed and handled the IT security aspect of this. And so far it seems like everything is going pretty well based on just anecdotal evidence. But that's part of our job, right? As the auditor, as the watchdogs, to go in and see how NASA's doing, and where possible, identify any areas for improvement going forward.
Are you seeing among your workforce, as this enters the longer and longer period and becomes less of a temporary thing, people actually missing the physically being together in the office?
By and large, yes. I have the pleasure of working with just a fantastic group of folks. As I just keep reminding them, they are awesome folks who are doing great work. But yeah, I think we do miss that idea of just being able to stroll down the hall and pop in to ask a quick question, or more importantly, just to check in to see how someone's doing. And that's one of the things we're thinking about now is how do we sort of replicate that virtually, either through virtual happy hours or virtual coffee chats, and none of our staff are fortunately organically making recommendations to us to like, hey, let's look for ways to get together other than just to talk about what's going on with work. But yeah, I do miss that, particularly for me, as I said, I thrive on that. I get my energy from my folks, and so sort of being physically distanced from them has been challenging. But again, I think we're starting to figure that out as well.
Well, here's hoping that someday soon we'll end up with the best of both worlds, the kind of flexibility that people are getting used to now, and the kind of camaraderie that being together in the same place brings from time to time as well. George, thanks so much for taking the time. We've come to the end of our allotted time, but we really appreciate it. And this was just a terrific way to kick us off. Let's see. Our next session, the Manager's Toolbox, will begin at 9 a.m. Eastern, and will feature Sarah Eckert, Chief of Projects for 18F at the General Services Administration, Danette Campbell, Director of the Telework Program at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and Nicole Barksdale Perry, Executive Director of Human Resources Management and Services at the Department of Homeland Security. During the break, don't go away. We encourage you to visit the exhibit hall and the chat room where you can connect with each other. And we'll see you for the Manager's Toolbox session in 30 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom.